Welcome back to the Photo Banter podcast. I'm your host, Alex Gagne, and on today's podcast, I speak with photographer Cayce Clifford. Cayce has worked with clients such as Rolling Stone, Airbnb, Wired, and Time Magazine, to name a few. In this interview, I speak to Cayce about studying photojournalism at Ohio University, her approach to portraiture, as well as one of her recent assignments for Rolling Stone, photographing artist Joan Baez. I also speak to Cayce about her experience photographing the California wildfires in Paradise, California, and how she approaches photographing people in such difficult and stressful situations. I really enjoy Cayce's approach to storytelling and portraiture, so I was really excited to get a chance to speak with her about her journey with photography. So I hope you enjoy, and thanks so much for listening. All right, well, Cayce Clifford, welcome to the podcast. Excited to talk to you. I guess first to start off, I was just curious, how you've been doing, like what you've been working on. I know setting up this interview last week, it sounded like you've been busy shooting. How's it been going so far lately?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been an interesting pandemic. I feel like things have sort of been all over the place as far as one week it's super busy and kind of nonstop emails, and then half the things fall through, and the next week you're kind of like, well, I guess I'll go on a walk around the neighborhood and try to make some photos because you know there's not much to do here. But it's been it's been good. I feel really lucky to have been working throughout a majority of this past year, and yeah, so far so good.
That's good. So is that something you do regularly? This kind of like this walk around your neighborhood and this kind of this snap away pretty much?
Yes, it's definitely been a place of like solace and just sort of seeing things from a different perspective. I try to walk a different way almost every day and sort of at a different time of day. And it's been neat to see sort of the progress of the natural elements and also people's spaces. Like, I think everything's sort of changing. People are obviously spending more time at home, so every place is sort of in a little bit of flux, so there's a lot to see.
No, definitely. That's awesome. One assignment, I was looking at your Instagram, you got to photograph Joan Baez for Rolling Stone recently.
Yeah.
I was just kind of curious your experience getting to work with her. It was a great portrait, but yeah, how was that kind of shoot for you?
That was a trip. Joan Baez was super kind. She lives like kind of south of San Francisco, so I got to leave my house for a little while and go explore the South Bay. She is dabbling, or not dabbling, she's like professionally doing painting as well as being like a badass in so many other ways.
Yeah.
And so we got to see her little painting studio that's in her backyard, and it's like in this beautiful wooded space. She, I think she's been photographed a lot of times. So, for me to be there, for me, it was such a privilege and an honor to come to her home, but she was sort of like, any other day. So she just, I don't know, she was very welcoming and kind, but also just like, she was herself.
No, that's awesome. I feel like, I don't know about you, but anytime you get to photograph someone at home as a photographer, I feel like I always walk away with like great images. I don't know if it's because the subject's more at ease being at home or what, but like, do you kind of feel like that when you get the chance to kind of photograph someone in their home?
Yeah. And for her, like, she's been on, so many stages and so many places in the world. And it was really cool to see her interacting with her space because you can tell she just really loves to be there. And she has kind of a group of people that work at her home and kind of live there and help keep the place, looking kept up. And she like loves them, and she has this big pool, and they all like hang out. And yeah, she was great, and seeing her in her element was totally awesome.
Now I'm just realizing looking at this photo again, is that Dwayne the Rock Johnson there on the
It
left?
totally, yeah, 100%. Yeah,
That's awesome.
she paints like all these, like Kamala Harris is behind him, and yeah, Bob Dylan is in the front. So she mostly paints other people of significance. So it's kind of cool. I think she had a little painting of Dr. Fauci, which was really
Oh,
awesome
really?
to see. Yeah.
No, that's great. How much time did you get to work with her when you went to photograph her?
We had about an hour to set up, which I try to build into the front of these kind of like quicker paste
Yep.
portrait shoots. So yeah, we were lucky enough to like have some time to sort of scout out spaces and set up lighting. My assistant, my friend Poppy, helped me out on it. Yeah, and I think we had probably about a whole hour, which is really, quite generous for someone like her who's got plenty of other better things to do in her life than hang out with me for the afternoon. But
No,
um,
that's awesome. And
yeah.
was that the first time you had worked with Rolling Stone, or do you kind of had worked with them previously?
No, I've worked with them. I've been really lucky to work with them quite a few times. Like Joe hired me for that shoot, who was on your podcast, and then Sasha has hired me, and yeah, I've done like 3 or 4 in the past few years, which have been I'm really grateful for. They've been like they're so kind, and for such a magazine with such name significance, it's cool to have some work with them.
No, that's awesome. And how, like, do they give you a lot of direction on the shoots you're doing, or they kind of just give you a little bit of idea of what they want, or like they like let you do your thing, or how does that kind of collaboration work for you with them, I guess?
Yeah, they're definitely open to collaboration and hearing, my kind of direction that I'd like to go in. But for this one, it was like specific about her painting. So we had to be in her painting studio, and it was pandemic. So we had to keep our distance because this was pre vaccination and like when I think it was shot in October. So it was still when things were a little bit like, you
Dicey.
know, we don't see the end. Yeah, there's no end in sight. And it was like, I don't want to, get too close or be inside. So I was outside the whole time, and I was just photographing through a door for that shot.
Yeah, how's that been? Like, I know, like, as someone myself who shoots portraits, and a lot of you do a lot of portrait work yourself. Like, have you found you've had to like change your approach a lot within the last year, how you photograph, or is it kind of getting back to normal, or like how's this kind of been the feel with obviously everything going on with the pandemic, I guess?
hmm well, I think I definitely had to make a switch at the beginning because I don't know. I'm lucky enough to be in San Francisco, and the weather is kind of like pretty much standard all the time. Like, you don't have much fluctuation besides fire weather, which is scary. And then, like, some days there are wind and hopefully some rain every so often. um, but I don't know. I think that I have been lucky to shoot on some really nice days. And I really try to plan out before I go to each shoot. Like, you know, even if I'm going to be in someone's backyard, like I, I try, it doesn't always happen, but to see an image of the backyard or like do some Google Maps, like driving around on Street View and like try to check out the angles, try to check out where the light might be. Um, and I think that's been helpful to like pre-plan, and that's kind of changed a little bit during pandemic.
Yeah, Google Scout. That's what I call it. I used it the other day. Like, it comes in handy sometimes. It's like you can't get to the location. It gives you it brings a sense of ease a little bit, you know. So sometimes you
Totally.
know what you're gonna walk into, kind of. But that's awesome. But I
Yep.
guess to go back, I was just kind of curious, like where you grew up and like how do you kind of originally get into photography?
Yeah. So I'm from New Jersey originally, like Western Central New Jersey. I feel like I have a very similar story to many other people. Like I had kind of stole my mom's camera from her and started to make MySpace images for my friends. It was like, back when that was a thing.
Wait, what was it?
Um,
Space images?
no, MySpace.
Oh,
You remember?
MySpace. Yeah.
you, you
What was
know,
what was the dude from MySpace? I forget what was his name. Was it Tom? Who
Tom.
everyone was, yeah, the one dude everyone was friends with, MySpace. That's throwing it back.
That's awesome. Yeah, it was kind of classic. I like got to go on a trip for my Spanish class to Costa Rica and brought a camera with me and was like, this is what I want to do forever. And yeah, kind of went from there, like just hanging out with friends and being the one with the camera, kind of learning how to just direct people and be in a space with a camera and kind of, be a photojournalist in the sense of like being, a fly on the wall.
No, that's awesome. Like, were you shooting film or straight to digital when you first started out?
Yeah, straight to digital. I like kind of hop skipped over. Like I played around with film and with darkroom stuff, but I really like the college I went to, Ohio University. Our program was strictly digital, and I think it had switched over like 3 or 4 years before I arrived. But yeah, basically like straight to digital. There was some film in the program, but it was only like if you wanted to take an extra class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. How'd you end up deciding to go to Ohio University? Because I mean, I know that's an amazing school. I believe it's really a big like photojournalism school, if I remember correctly, right?
Yep. They also have commercial programs, but it really, they kind of keep it separate. So if you're on the photojournalism track, you really like dive in specifically. Um, I don't know. I explored a bunch of options for photo schools. Like I knew that's what I wanted to do, but I put together a little like very menial portfolio and brought it over and shared with the professors. And I looked at RIT to go there, which is also a great option, but I they had like snow tunnels between
Yeah,
dorms, and I was like, I am not gonna be in this deep of snow for my whole winters. So yeah, that was one thing. I like the snow, but I'm not that into it.
definitely. And I guess when you got to school there, like, did you obviously looking at the work you do now, you do a lot of portraiture, editorial work, and some other amazing stuff. Like
Mhm.
even going to school, did you kind of have an idea of like what you wanted to do? Were there like any kind of influences to your work early on or anything like that?
Yeah, I knew that I really enjoyed getting to know people and seeing them in their elements. Um, I sort of wanted to do a little bit more strict photojournalism than I think what I'm doing now. Like coming out of school, I've sort of pushed away from that in the sense that I'm doing a little bit more directing, a little bit more like, augmenting light with flash. And um, yeah, I was really interested in just being in celebrating moments with people and like, you know, the tough times and the really beautiful moments. So
No, it's
that's kind of what
awesome.
got me into it. Yeah.
And what kind of stuff, like looking back when even when you're in school, like what kind of stuff were you shooting? What was it like portrait based, like storytelling stuff or sports? Because like I know like when I was in photo school, their photojournalism program was basically like teaching kids how to be like a newspaper photographer at that point. But
Yes.
what kind of stuff were you working on even when you were a student, I guess?
Yeah. I guess I knew what I didn't want to do. I didn't really want to do sports stuff. Like I shot a couple of sports assignments for like the New York Times and stuff since school ended. And it's always funny. I'm like with my medium format, like super slow camera, and all these guys are on the field just like, who is this person? What is she doing with that like slow camera? Um, but anyway, yeah, I at school I did some longer term storytelling, and I tried to push myself away from like the daily news grind. Like I had an internship at a newspaper, and it just like wasn't my thing. I kept wanting more and wanting to spend more time with people. And it was just like, that's not how it really goes. You're like
Bing
doing
bang
4
boom.
assignments a day and yeah, quick in and out, like getting what you need to get and filing from your car. And like, I'm just not good at that.
I hear you.
Yeah.
And I guess like once you kind of got out of school, like what was kind of your first step into the photo industry? Did you kind of go straight to shooting or did you kind of have any jobs before you kind of made the jump into like freelancing, like which what you're doing now?
hmm I did quite a bit of assisting and being a PA on shoots, like larger kind of brand campaigns. I had a friend who was a producer and she would hire me to like help set up, everything, basically any part of shoots. So I think that was a really good experience. I got to see sort of all sides of the production world.
Was that in San Francisco or?
Oh, sorry, that was actually in Salt Lake City. So I moved after college in Ohio. I moved to Salt Lake City for 5 years and
Wow, that's
worked.
that's amazing because everyone like
Yeah,
honestly probably 99% of the kids I went to school with they either go to New York or LA. I don't think I've ever heard Salt Lake City, so that's really interesting.
totally. Yeah. So I met my husband in photo school and he had an internship at the Provo Daily Herald. He was also or is also a photographer and was doing newspaper stuff back then. Um, and so he moved there and like I had like a brief job for this place called Rustic Pathways, which was like a travel, like kids from high school would travel to different countries. And I went to Costa Rica and the Dominican Republic and Fiji. And I got to like hang out with people and just photograph like some
Damn,
interesting
so you got to go to
experiences.
Fiji?
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, that was really cool. So that was like kind of 3 summers in a row, but that was when I had already moved to Salt Lake City. Yeah, I was kind of trying to base myself out of there and be a photographer, but I didn't really know what kind of photographer I wanted to be because I knew more so what I didn't want to be. So yeah, it was really a lot of like learning kind of the different worlds that were out there besides just what Ohio University had
Yeah,
taught
definitely.
me. So
And I know you mentioned your husband went to photography school too. What's it like having a
mhm.
partner who's also like a photographer? Are you guys like competitive? Do you guys kind of help each other like edit your work? Or that seems like a cool dynamic.
It's cool. Yeah, we could have a whole podcast about that. It's kind of it's hard and good at the same time. I mean, both of us are like definitely from different or strive for different types of work, which I think is cool because I could support him in that and he can support me in my work. He does like a lot of longer form storytelling, like where he'll sort of go to a place and spend like a month there and hang out with the people in the place. And my work has sort of moved into the realm of like editorial, like, assignment work.
No,
Um,
that's awesome.
yeah.
And yeah, how did you who were like some of the first clients once you started kind of shooting editorial or taking on jobs and kind of shooting your own stuff? Like who were kind of some of the first clients and assignments you got?
I think maybe the one of the first few assignments were like Bloomberg News. That was like this woman Farah hired me to photograph a fish, like a trout farm, which was really cool. And I think New York Times after that was like those were my first few.
And like how
But
are
I would go to
oh, that's awesome. And like how are you kind of getting your work out there? Were you just kind of emailing people or was this kind of through social media marketing or like how are you kind of getting on people's radar? Because as you know, that's like half the battle in this business is letting people know that you're around and what you're doing, you know?
yeah, certainly. I tried to after college, like once a year, I would make a trip to New York. And since I'm from New Jersey, it would be like, double family and work trip. So I would go try to email as many people as I could and be like, hey, I'm in New York. Like, or I'll be in New York in a week. Let me know if you have any time for me. And I got pretty lucky. Like some days I'd just be like, without any meetings and I just like be in New York City, like, what do I do now?
Yeah.
But other days I would have like 4 or 5 meetings in a row and be like, oh my God, why did I plan a meeting in Midtown and then a meeting in Brooklyn, like within 2 hours of each other? Like it's way too stressful. Um, but yeah, I got through that. I met so many kind editors who were excited that I was in Salt Lake City because there were a few, but not very many photographers there. But they were also like, we have like maybe one assignment a year in Salt Lake because not really
Yeah,
much
yeah.
happens there. um, but that's okay. It was an easy place to live after college. It was very inexpensive and kind of the perfect place to start out, sort of just lots of adventure and fun, and I could work at a restaurant and make enough money to pay my rent. So that was
I
kind of
love
what I did for a while.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love Utah. I went to Moab, Utah in college and like I feel like it's just like an underrated state, you know?
Yeah, it's really blown up right now, I think. Like all my friends who live there and own houses are now like their homes have doubled in price, and it seems like yeah, it was a good place to invest in like 5 years ago, and now it's just like everyone's moving to these mid-sized cities
Yeah.
because they're super awesome.
Man, I'm messed up. I should have invested in Utah real estate and Bitcoin
I
about 8 years
know.
ago. I'd be chilling.
Yes,
uh,
very similar.
what kind of brought you to San Francisco? Like, how did you kind of end up moving out there?
Well, after 5 years in Utah, it was sort of like, I had been freelancing and working, but I didn't really feel very comfortable being a photographer full time. I like always worked at a restaurant or had other sort of like income to supplement.
Yep.
But it was sort of like, all right, we're either going to like set down roots and like buy a house here, which we should have, or we're going to move to a bigger market. And like, I sort of rejected the idea of moving to New York City because like you said, all my friends from high school and college, like were there. And LA was a prospect, but, I was a little more comfortable coming to San Francisco. It's like, I don't know, it just seemed more accessible for some reason. Yeah, came at a good time, I think.
No, that's amazing. And like moving to a new market, was that kind of like a daunting task? You feel like you're kind of like starting from square one again, like trying to get your name out there to like local clients. And then obviously you might have existing clients with like Bloomberg, and then you have to like let them know, hey, I moved and stuff like that. Was that kind of like a daunting task once you kind of move there and try to like set up your roots, I guess, in a new city?
Exactly. Yeah, that was it was difficult at first, and it was sort of like as soon as I moved to California, I was like getting calls for some work in Utah, and I was like, why? Like you didn't, no, you didn't call me while I was there, so why now? But it wasn't too hard because San Francisco is there's like a lot happening all the time that even though there's a lot of photographers here, it feels like we're all kind of making it happen somehow.
Yeah, you guys got obviously amazing magazine with Wired, who I know you've worked with. You did a cool, I was going to ask you about it. You did a
Mhm.
whole climate issue thing for Wired magazine, which is based in San Francisco. How's it
Yeah.
kind of getting to work with them? And like, how do you kind of initially start like working with them? Because I think that's the one thing I'm always interested in, like how people get their foot in the door and start working with the client. But what was kind of your experience working with Wired with the climate issue, I guess?
Yeah, the climate issue was really cool. I did a couple meetings like once I moved to San Francisco with the portfolio here, and they were one of the groups that I had met with, and I was just like, I don't I don't just seeing the editors at random events happening in the city here.
Yeah.
And then one day Lauren called me and she was like, hey, we have this issue coming up and we want to hire you to shoot like all the stories in it. So myself and another photographer covered um, like he sort of did more landscape detail type things, and I photographed a couple of stories in San Francisco and one in Detroit.
Oh
So I
wow,
got to
they sent you to Detroit.
Yeah, so I got to photograph this car manufacturer called Rivian. They make this electric vehicle that's like the they're like partnering with LL Bean to make like the dream truck off-roading electric vehicle.
Wow.
Um, yeah, they're really cool. But that
And
was no, go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say, yeah, with this shot, it looks like they basically this kind of clipped it out, or is that kind of what it looked like when you shot it, I guess?
Well, kind of crazy. This whole factory had white floors.
Wow.
So it was amazing. It was so really not clipped. I just sort of um yeah, used a couple different lights to try to light the whole situation. But yeah, I you can't really get more lucky than that.
That's amazing. So with like an assignment like this where you're shooting a lot of different stuff, like how do you kind of prepare for an assignment like this? Do you kind of you'll make a list of like shots you're hoping to get, or is it more just kind of an organic process for you kind of showing up and seeing where it goes, or like what's that kind of process for you?
Yeah, definitely shot lists are helpful and sort of like mood boards to drive creative direction for lighting and for portraits and that sort of thing. This one was a little bit different because, well, this Rivian one was a little more planned out, but the other two shots were kind of a little more fly by the seat of our pants.
Mm,
The first images in the series are of the director of transportation for San Francisco, and
mhm.
he was really late, so he showed up like 30 minutes after sunset, basically
Shit.
started. So yeah, we had this whole plan in place. I scouted, had my assistant. We were just kind of waiting on Market Street for this guy to show up. and which is fine. He's very busy and was very busy.
Mm-hmm.
It happens all the time. But Market Street is sort of notorious in San Francisco, sort of notorious for people getting their gear stolen. So I'm always like,
Oh
I
shit.
hate to be kind of like, sitting duck out there on Market Street waiting for the worst to happen.
So like assignments like this, are you generally like working with an assistant, or is it you kind of by yourself doing your thing, or like what's that kind of process?
Most of the time, I would say probably 80% of shoots that I do are just me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I sort of like probably look like a little crazy person, but I like carry my light on a stand and sort of run around and, chase people. But when I am able to hire an assistant, it's very liberating. And I think every single one of these shoots I had an assistant on, which it's super, it just takes your mind off of doing everything at once, which I'm sure you've dealt with
Oh
before.
yeah, definitely. I just did it yesterday. I was like lugging
Yeah,
C stands and stuff because it was just me. And then like by the time I'm ready to shoot the picture, I'm like huffing and puffing and like
exactly. Yeah.
especially you got your mask on, I can barely breathe.
I know, exactly. It takes a lot of stress off your mind when you have someone who can even like, you know, if you're out on the street, make sure the light doesn't blow over, or you carrying a sandbag and a camera and this and that. It just you become very frazzled, I think, and it's nice to have someone to just like watch your back a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And then it's like in terms of like the style and like aesthetic of your work, like obviously you mentioned like you like to use strobe. Has that kind of always been part of your workflow? And like I guess overall, did it kind of take you a while to kind of find your voice and approach to the style of your work, I guess?
Yeah, I would say the pandemic has made me choose a little bit more to use like that flash. Like I would prefer natural light, but um, at this point in the game, I sort of am trying to make things as natural as possible, looking with just a little additional pop of light. So sort of just adding to sunlight or adding a little extra sun in there. And I think the pandemic has changed that because I'm showing up to places that, we're out on the street at noon in front of someone's house, and it's like, well, we're sort of set up for a little bit of a difficult lighting situation to begin with. So just adding a little bit of rounding out to the natural light or naturally overhead noon light is really beneficial.
Definitely. I really love this portrait on your Instagram. And
Thanks.
like I'm guessing you lit it with strobe, but it looks pretty much like daylight. I could be wrong.
No, it's true. It was actually raining when this was shot, and it was like one of those really ugly rainy days that just like, when you want to just stay inside. So I was actually like halfway in and halfway out of her door in her kitchen, and I had this strobe with a big like plastic garbage bag over it outside, to make sure that it didn't explode in the rain. And it was, yeah, just a light kind of beaming through her kitchen windows, and yeah, I think it looks pretty realistic, but it was a real
No,
ugly day out there.
no, I really loved it. It was almost like it kind of had like a very like cinematic feel to it, but it was like not like too overly flashy. It was one of my favorite pictures on your Instagram.
Thanks.
And
Appreciate it.
like, what's your approach with like portraiture? Are you someone, do you give your subjects a ton of direction, or do you kind of let them bring their own vibe to it? Or like, what's your, when you're doing portraiture stuff, like, what's your kind of workflow in terms of like directing people, I guess?
Well, I kind of start off with the least crucial shots just to warm somebody up, because I think it takes probably like, you don't always get the luxury of time, but like 10 minutes for someone to really like relax. And I try to make them feel at as home as possible, even though they're like, sitting in a weird chair and feeling like they don't know where to put their hands and they don't know how to turn their face. So I make sure that people feel as like natural as they can, which is not easy. And I do direct people in the sense that, I kind of turn their heads different directions. I make sure that their body posture is not like slumped, and people kind of have the tendency to want to like hide in a way.
Definitely.
So giving them something to like put their hands on is, I think, something nice, like a chair or a wall, just like leaning or doing something that's like more, um, I guess, helps them hold themselves.
No, that makes sense. And I guess like in terms of like the stuff, like what kind of assignments pique your interest most these days? Like when you get the call, what kind of gets you excited? Is it the portrait stuff or more kind of long form storytelling stuff, or what kind of stuff you think you're interested in most these days?
Yeah, I definitely love portraits and anything like I love photographing like business women. I feel like that's something I've been doing a lot of lately. And um, I don't know, just people who are really pushing the boundaries of their own professions and their own worlds.
Yeah.
And yeah, I miss photographing people inside their homes. That's like one of the coolest parts of my job, I think, is just like being there, being in someone's house and like seeing them and like the their lives basically. And now it's missing.
No, definitely. I find like the business stuff, there's a lot of that work out there. I find it anybody who's like really good at it, like that is such a skill. Like I struggle with it. Like when you walk into these offices where it's like cubicle country and it's like white walls, like how do you like when you walk into a space like that, like how are you like navigating your approach? Because I always just struggle because it's just like, I don't know.
It's yeah, that's definitely hard. And I like honestly I would rather photograph anything else besides that. But um I don't know. The main things that I like joke around with PR people who are leading me around. I'm like, how can we get all these lights off? Like, I want to turn all these like overhead fluorescent lights off away. Like, usually it doesn't always work out in my favor, but um, that gets some like natural window light coming through. See where there's like some spots of sun that are making, interesting um, patterns in light. Yeah, the cubicle thing is hard. It really the open office format is difficult to photograph because they all kind of start to look the same after a while.
No, definitely. That's a good tip. You just kind of chase the light. If there's cool like light coming in the window, just utilize you basically utilize whatever is in your surroundings to your advantage pretty much. Do you ever run into this, like especially when you're photographing like business people like CEOs or whoever it may be, that the PR people will sometimes come to you and be like, hey, we normally have him photograph over here. I
Like in
always
front of the sign, like the
yeah,
company logo.
whatever. I'm just like, no. Like that's not what we're
Yes,
doing.
that's
uh,
definitely real. It's like, oh, well, like half the people who come in here, they want to photograph in front of like, this power sign that's like, with the arms crossed and all the things. And it's like, all right, well, half of the time I'm just like, all right, I'm gonna do that for you just to make you feel a little bit better for a minute, just to like, hear you out. And then how about we just walk over here for a minute? Let's just, I always say this, let's just try. Like, it doesn't have to be what we decide, but then, after a minute, they're always like, oh, this does look cool. And you're like,
no.
yeah, I know.
No, you're right. That's you're so smart. Like you have to like please them and like help and not be like defensive, like, I don't want to do that. You really have to kind of like it's like mental
Right.
gymnastics a little bit, like one for
Oh
them,
yeah,
one for me, kind of, right?
exactly. Yeah. I would rather sort of stand up and be like, oh no, this is the way we're going to do it. But then, you know, after a while, it's just sort of like, oh, it's just easier if I kind of get that out of the way for a minute. And yeah, they're going to be more open and willing to have me try my thing if I try theirs.
No, definitely. That's good advice. And one assignment I was interested in talking to you about, you did this assignment for the New York Times, heavy story. Like I was kind of
Yeah.
curious, like, how do you approach an assignment like this? Just reading it for me, I like going into an assignment like this, I would feel like some level of like nerves, I guess, because you're photographing someone, this guy's Stevie Gold, who was about sexual abuse that he endured in his life, and obviously heavy topic, and anybody having to like relive this and think about it and then be photographed for an article about one of the worst times in his life. Like, how do you go into an assignment like this that's just such a heavy topic, I guess?
Yeah, it was really difficult. I was lucky enough to be meeting Stevie with the reporter who had been kind of investigating the story for a long time. Not investigating, but he was covering the story. This is the district attorney. So I actually met the district attorney first in the day. I kind of heard his perspective and talked to him about the case. So I felt like I kind of knew, the details. So I didn't.
For people listening, if you could just kind of maybe explain a little bit about the story, who
Oh,
Stevie
sure.
was, and like what the whole kind of the article is about, I guess.
Yeah. So Stevie was or is a really talented tennis player who was abused in high school by a coach who sort of coached people who were not really high school, but like a little, I guess, extracurricular from high school, more statewide teams and things like that. But he would go to these competitions with the young kids who were like, promising athletes, and he would basically like stay in hotels with them. And it turned out to be this whole just years and years of abuse against young boys. And so they tried to catch him. He was also a high school teacher, and they tried to catch him once. The charges were like, for some reason, they didn't believe the kids who came out about this. So they had to do a whole sting operation to catch him. And basically, they like wired up Stevie, and he had to go and basically make the guy confess.
Wow.
So yeah, it was horrible that, they can't just hear someone's story and say, okay, we're going to try to help you. They had to like, catch the guy. And I feel like that's even more traumatic for Stevie and for other kids.
Definitely, yeah, like going back and reliving the person who like terrorized you in your life. I can't imagine. That's horrific.
Exactly. So finally, this guy is in prison. The DA is this guy in the suit, and he was the one who kind of pushed the case through. And yeah, so luckily solved for now. But like, it's horrible. Like Stevie, he's so kind and such a nice person. And I just tried to be as empathetic as I could to his situation.
And this is Stevie right here.
Yeah, yep. And he and his family were understandably like, they didn't really want photos and weren't sure about having pictures taken. So I don't know, Stevie was like, no, I'm gonna do this. I want to share my story. I want to like have this out there. And yeah, it was really powerful and really nice to meet someone who, wanted to be a voice for other people who are unfortunately in the same position.
No, definitely. And I guess just as a photographer, a human being, like when you get an assignment like this, do you ever have nerves going into it? Like, how do you kind of manage that going into assignments if you do ever have like kind of this anxious, I guess?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I get a little bit nervous before any type of shoot. I'm just like, you know, it's a vulnerable position to be in for both parties. Like, I'm of the understanding that the subject is putting their story out there for whatever reason, and they're giving part of their vulnerabilities to me. So I kind of try to be as open as I can to them. And for that kind of assignment, I want to be as delicate as I can. And I know that my editor needs these images, and I need to provide them for the story to go forward. But yeah, I try to like let people slowly kind of become comfortable with me being there. And I never like, I think I sat with Stevie and his family for like a whole hour with the reporter before we even took one image. So
That's smart. Yeah. Instead of just like rushing into it, like snap, 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 snap. It's like, no,
yeah.
it's like talk, get a sense of like who you are. Like, I'm not like out to get you or anything. That's
Yeah, exactly. Because they have been taken. I mean, in Stevie's case, he was taken advantage by someone in the past.
mhm.
So it's yeah, like I said, it's vulnerable for him to give his story out there.
No, definitely. And another series of photos I was interested in talking to you about, like
Hmm.
another heavy story, like
Yeah.
the wildfires in California, down in Paradise, California. I guess I was just gonna ask, like, have you always just been kind of comfortable approaching people to photograph them, or like, is it something you feel like you kind of got better at over time? Because obviously, with this story as well, it's a terrible experience. These people are losing their homes, their so much stuff, and people. It's a very touchy thing. It's like
Yeah.
how do you kind of approach that? And like, you've always been comfortable just kind of approaching people in these situations.
Yeah, I would say half of these images were people who I was set up to meet with, and then half of them are people who I just sort of like kind of stumbled upon in the moment. And I have definitely hesitation and like nerves when it comes to like going up to strangers, especially in this kind of environment. Like
Mm.
there's one image that's coming up where the rescuers found a body in one of the homes that was burnt down. And it was just like the most uncomfortable feeling for me to like, I knew that that image, I wanted to show it because of, the place we were in that was just ravaged by fire. Sorry, I guess it's further down than I
Oh, right
thought.
here.
But like, yeah, I tried to be respectful, stay far back, use a long lens, but like still try to share, this moment. Um, yeah, for me, I feel like I want to avoid that like the vulture kind
Mm.
of attitude of journalism, and I really get turned off by the fact of like, lots of photographers around trying to capture people in like their, the most awful days of their lives. So this kind of storytelling it's definitely feels controversial in my own psyche.
Yeah, no,
But
it's definitely yeah, I think any element of photography, it's like as a photographer, you are like whatever you're photographing, you're kind of like taking something at the end of the day a little bit. Like no matter what you're
yeah,
shooting, you are like going into someone's space. So it's like, but I think like
right.
the way you talk about it, you have respect for these people and you're taking the time to talk to them and you're not just like jumping in and jumping out. So it's like there's like a process to it, it sounds like.
Yeah, I definitely try to hear people out and have like a actual conversation with them. And yeah, some of these people were like in shelters and or tent camps that were set up like, where people lost everything and were just like kind of hanging out in Walmart parking lot where people were bringing donations because they had nothing to wear the next day, or toothpaste, or like simple things like that. That I tried to be as gentle as I could in those situations. And I had some experiences with like sitting down with someone, like literally sitting on the ground talking to people and having like news media or other journalists come up and be like, "Oh, like, can I get this shot?" And I'd be like, "What? Like, come on." I have been sitting here for like 20 minutes. I'm just trying to have a conversation. I'm literally like not trying to get anything out of this person other than talking to them. And you're like waiting for me to leave, like hovering over my shoulder.
Yeah,
So,
that's kind of gross. It's just like, man, don't be a vulture. Like, have some
yeah,
respect for the people. It's like, yeah, you gotta do your job. I get it, but it's like it's still like human beings at the end of the day, you know?
I know.
Um,
I
but
definitely struggle with that. And I try not to be too negative, but that's something that I definitely feel um, that I want to change in myself is sort of like, you know, think about my process, be as human as I can, and realize that the people who I'm sharing are giving something to me. And one, like, who who am I uplifting, or who am I trying to uplift? And two, like, who will be consuming this, and how will they be consuming this, if that makes sense? Like,
no, definitely. I think it all comes back to like your intention, like why you're doing it. Like you're doing it because I mean, photojournalism is so important. Like, yeah, these the photos of these people in the wildfire or the photos of Stevie, it's terrible situations that no one wants to live through, but it's important that other people get to see these pictures, hear these people's stories so they understand like what's going on in the world. And like, I don't know, just looking at the work, you can tell you have compassion for the people you're photographing. So it's like, yeah, if you have good intentions, I think it's positive and important work to do, you know?
thanks. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess I was gonna ask you about your work. Like, do you view yourself as like a photojournalist, or like, because like the traditional photojournalists that they won't do, like they only can do so much editing to their work. Like, how do you kind of view your work as, like, are you a photojournalist? Will you utilize certain Photoshop techniques on your work, or how does that kind of work for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess in my head, when I think about it, I try to avoid the word like photojournalism. I think there's a lot of like traditions associated with it that are sort of
Hmm.
I'm gonna start like a controversial thing here, but they're sort of like antiquated in a sense. Like I think that I'm this blend or trying to create this blend of like art photography, documentary, and photojournalism, and like bringing it all together. And through that, like I really don't do any Photoshop. Like I do basic edits. I'm not like deleting anything from the photo. Basic edits as far as like color balance and brightness and contrast and stuff like that. But yeah, just basic toning. But I'm definitely like it depends on the publication, I guess. Like if I'm photographing for the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, I'm sticking to the photojournalism guidelines. Like, you
Yeah.
know, I'm not um, moving things around or like taking stuff out of the frame that I don't think should be there.
Yeah.
But when I approach my personal work or work for more portrait based like magazine work, I will like try to make the scene as emblematic of the story as it should be, or it needs to be. And yeah,
No, that's
if that
definitely, it's
answers.
interesting. And another a couple more questions, I'll let you go. I
No,
saw on your Instagram you worked on it sounded like a really fun assignment back in 2016. You went on Amtrak, one of their trains. I believe it was for like their like in-house like magazine. You went from like San Francisco to Salt Lake City by train. I was just kind of curious, like what was it kind of working on that assignment, I guess?
yeah, it was so cool. Actually, so Jim, my partner, and I, we got to take the train together, and we had we actually rode the Amtrak from Salt Lake City to New York, like to the East Coast, via different routes.
Wow,
And
how long did that take?
yeah, it was so long. It was like 4 days, I think, or like 2.5 seasons of Game of Thrones, as I remember it. We didn't have the sort of train car that you can sleep in. We just had seats, so we just like sat for 4 days straight. But anyway, it was a cool experience. So we met with the Amtrak. It's called the National, the Amtrak's magazine, and we got hired to shoot. I think he originally started to shoot for them on his own, but then somehow I got connected to it as well, so we shot it together.
That's awesome.
It was cool. It was hard to photograph on the train because people are like,
What are you doing?
they take exactly they like take the train for solace and to like be I don't know, not be bothered. And we had one really fun experience with like the car that has all the windows in it.
Yeah.
There were just like a bunch of people playing cards and hanging out for like days on end, and they had like big bags of wine with them. That was it was so wild. They like pull wine out of their duffel bag and pour it into their cups. And they were just like kind of fun people to sort of see and hang out with. But yeah, it was tough, but also a fun assignment.
No, it definitely looked awesome. Photos came out great. People can check it out. I know you have a
Thanks.
bunch on your, I don't know if they're on your website, but they are on your Instagram. People can go scroll back there. There's some cool stuff.
Thanks.
Um,
Yeah.
Speaking about Instagram, I talk about Instagram with friends all the time. Like how do you approach it? Like, I mean, obviously it's an important tool as a photographer. I think no one can deny that. Uh,
Right.
some people view it as like an extension of their portfolio. Some people utilize it more of kind of this their day-to-day life, kind of a fun approach. Like, what do you think about Instagram, and like how do you approach it, I guess, as a marketing tool, I guess, for your work?
Yeah, I try to um not go on it as much as I do, but I end up like spending a lot of time on there. Like it is right now, it's been a really good resource to like contain your community while you're not able to be with each other. Like
Yep.
I definitely keep up with all my friends and photo people that way, but it becomes this echo chamber in a sense that kind of really frustrates me. I see, something happens and like everyone will post the same thing, and it's like, all right, are we really like sharing actual news or like important discussion with each other? And I do think that there is a lot of important tools, and sometimes I try to post things on there to like share with family members that I don't think will see,
Yeah.
stuff otherwise in the world.
Yep. I got a couple of those family members.
Yeah. But yeah, it does trouble me how insular it is as a place of discussion. It's sort of like, you know a lot of conversation will happen on there and not in real life, and that kind of is unfortunate.
No, I agree. And as a photographer, I don't know if you've ever had this. You can definitely go down start comparing yourself to other people's work, and you're like, well, I'm not working. It can get, I don't know. You can start feeling like, I don't know. I've had those feelings before. Like, what am I, should I be
Yeah,
doing this? Should I be doing that? Like, am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong?
definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's a very powerful tool. You can make yourself, or people can make themselves seem like they're really busy when they're actually not. And I felt that way before. Like people would come up to me like throughout the last year, and be like, "Oh, it seems like you're killing it." And I really have trouble being like, you know, I feel like I'm very thankful to be still working, but also I'm like, that's not how it really is. Like,
Yeah.
it's I post a lot of stuff, but I'm not necessarily doing that like every day. I'm not. I
Yep.
don't know if I really feel like I'm killing it myself. So
Hey, well, that's good to hear.
I'm
I
glad.
think I'm in the same boat, so it feels
Good.
good. You put me at ease.
Yes.
That's
Good.
great.
I hope
But
so.
I guess to wrap up, like, what's next for you, Casey? Like, obviously, you accomplished a lot already, gotten to work with some amazing clients and produced a lot of amazing work. But like, what's next for you? Like, kind of any goals for your photography moving forward? I guess.
Thanks. Yeah. I think at some point I'd like to start doing a little bit more creative direction, in the sense of like doing a little bit more ad work,
Mhm.
or finding the place where documentary meets ad, trying to maybe at some point do some personal work. Like I think that it's easy to get caught up in like the editorial grind. You're sort of like, all right, I'm going to do this assignment, and then all right, I've accomplished my goals for the day. Like I did a shoot.
Yep.
But really, I'd like to, at this point, start planning my own shoots, and pushing for doing a little bit more long-term work. I have a couple story ideas that like I'd like to try. One of them is in Italy, so that's not going to happen.
Hey,
Um,
hopefully, so hopefully soon. I mean, they're in lockdown again, but hopefully maybe next year. Fingers
I
crossed.
know, yeah, knock on wood. So we'll see that kind of thing. I'm trying to find some stories that are more close to home,
No, that's
drivable.
great. Actually, I forgot. I was going to ask you about this one picture. It's on your
Yeah.
website. It says personal work. You photographed a man named Lenny, and said he was
Mm.
pardoned from 2 life sentences plus 100 years. Yeah, what was that project all about?
Yeah, so I haven't really talked about it yet, but this is a good time to start that conversation. But in I think 2016, when I was living in Utah, I photographed a woman for the New York Times who had been writing letters back and forth to, it's kind of a complicated story, but basically she knew this guy in high school. She found out he was in prison. She started writing letters to him, and they ended up getting married.
Hmm.
So the story was about their conversation. They like made a book together out of all the letters. And so she started working um, with an like a nonprofit sort of group who helped to get him pardoned from his life sentences. So she basically like led the effort to try to get him out of prison because he
Wow.
was unfairly incarcerated. He like robbed a couple convenience stores in the 80s while he was, um, I think he was on some sort of drugs. And yeah, from just robbing, he got like away with $500 or something. He got put in prison for 2 life sentences plus 100 years.
Wow.
So it was just like extremely unfair sentencing. Um, yeah, so after Lenny got released, I went back to their home in Utah and spent a few days with them. Like I just like slept in their guest room
Wow.
and yeah, and hung out. Got to like meet him in person, and I have a lot of images that I would like to share at some point soon, but
So you think
now
you'll
they
keep photographing them for a while?
maybe I'm curious to what I'm gonna do, but now Lenny and her name's Vandy, they're gonna be working together to get some other people pardoned from prison. So
Mm.
yeah, we'll see. It's sort of it's a story that I'm not sure I'm going to continue, but also I think about it all the time and think about meeting them. So
No, it's awesome. It was a great
thanks
portrait.
for asking.
No,
Thanks.
definitely. Well, Cayce, pleasure talking to you. I could have talked to you forever,
Nice.
but
No,
really,
nice to talk to you too.
yeah, love your work. And I guess for anybody listening, if they want to check out more of your work, where's the best place for them to go?
Well, Instagram, I guess, is the more up to date, but I recently redid my website, so
All right,
myname.com.
CayceClifford.com. I'll link it and people can go
Yeah.
check it out. But thanks so much, Cayce.
Cool. Thank you.
Take care.
Appreciate
Bye.
it. Take care.
Bye. So there you have it. That was the Cayce Clifford interview. Just want to thank Cayce so much for taking the time to come on the podcast. Big fan of her work. She does amazing portraiture, and there's a lot of really interesting projects on her website. So definitely go check out her work. Her website is CayceClifford.com, as well as definitely go give her a follow on Instagram at Cayce Clifford. Lots of amazing work she's always posting up there. So definitely go give her a follow. And as always, I'll be having weekly podcasts every week on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, as well as the Photo Banter YouTube page. So definitely go check us out on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button, as it'd be much appreciated. And as always, thanks so much for listening, and take care.